thank you all for joining us today. There were a lot of great panels all at the same time, so I appreciate you spending some time with us. Before we begin, I'd like to share the broader context for this panel. About a year and a half ago to 2 years ago, the Jefferson Education Accelerator partnered with Digital Promise and the University of Virginia Curry School of Education. And the idea was to organize 10 working groups, and they each were dealing with a specific question around ed tech efficacy. Those groups included 150 experts from all different parts of the ecosystem. Then last week in DC, we gathered those same 150 experts together, brought in another 100 or so folks to report on those findings and then to really kind of delve in, add to those and kind of really figure like what were going to be the next steps. So part of what we're doing today is actually sharing some of what we learned over the past year and a little bit about what came out of our symposium last week. Now, we are going to try to innovate a little bit on the panel format. So bear with us. We're going to try something different. So to set the stage, I'm going to have Craig Roberts, Christina Luke, and Mark Epstein. We're going to model a typical K-12 decision-making process as part of a scenario. Then our panelists are going to share how the scenario resonates with the findings shared at the symposium.
Well, so glad to be here in the break room taking a break.
Faculty rooms are awesome, except for the coffee. It's always bad. But yeah, so how have things been going with that tool you've been using, Bart? Raindrop? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Raindrop is really working well. I put a lot of effort into learning it and how to implement it and how to get the reports. So I think we're ready to spread it around to the rest of the school.
I remember that you've had a lot of professional development in that tool, and you've really struggled with trying to get students engaged with it, but so glad to hear it's finally, really working for you.
Yeah, I put a lot of time into it.
Yeah.
How y'all doing today?
Oh, Superintendent Roberts.
Superintendent Roberts, what brings you to our little
Yeah,
school?
it's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I like your tie.
Thank you very much. How's everything going for you all?
Great.
Great. We're really excited about some of the things that we're working on and hoping to spread
Did you
around.
hear about the new tool that we're using, Personalized Adaptive Learning, the new platform? I'm sure you heard about. I'm sure you got the emails from me.
You mean Raindrop?
No, Raindrop's off the radar now. We found a much better product. I was at this conference last month. I met the CEO. Amazing person. His beard was fantastic. He's got a learning science background. He knows it's everything we need to get the students our outcomes that we need.
So what's the research behind it?
Well, we had a great dinner together, and he really dove deep into what some of the findings are that they're getting from some of the districts, particularly diverse districts that align really well with our goals.
So are we going to have a pilot where we compare Raindrop to?
It's so compelling. We're just going to go district wide right off the bat. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, great. Well, I'll let you guys get back to it. I don't want to take too much of your time. I'll talk to you soon. Keep it up.
Okay. Is he?
Is he gone?
Good luck making me use it.
He's on the 3rd year of his 3-year contract. We can just ride this out and not even try the new tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, new scene.
Let's go talk to Superintendent Roberts about this.
hey.
Hello,
Good to see you.
Superintendent Roberts.
Yes,
you may
how are
remember
you?
us from the Raindrop.
Yes, of course I do. How are you?
Yes.
Personalized adaptive now.
Right.
Of course. So we
have a
learning
little
how the
challenge.
process works, what we thought was we've identified a need, and we thought we'd let you and your team know about it so you could investigate and then start a process.
Of
Right.
course.
So we need our English language learners are really struggling with math.
Yes, huge
And-
problem in our district.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'd love some support in finding a really good research-based tool to target those learners to help improve their outcomes.
Absolutely.
Great,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we're really swamped,
Let's get
so
back
we're
to
so
it.
glad
We're
to hear you.
pro-teaching.
Well, why don't you all
on
do
that,
a little
yeah.
research on that? And I've got to respond to this tweet, but you've got it. Put some research together, and we'll do a little pilot on it. Sound good? All right.
All
Thanks,
right,
guys.
okay.
Take care.
All right, so we'll do some research.
I think we've just been
right.
voluntold.
Yep. So let me
right.
just email. You know what? Actually, I'll start by Googling. I'll just
All
Google
right,
it.
I'm going to make a couple calls.
And all right.
I got a guy when it comes to ed tech. Hello, Joe? Yeah, we need some English language learning support for our struggling math students. What do you guys use over there? Yeah? All right, how do you like it? Any problems? All right, how did you hear about it? All right, well, she's pretty good. If she picked it, she must know what she's doing. All right, great. Thanks.
Bart, I think I found something. All right, so it's got a report that says something about quasi-experimental matched comparison.
Effect study.
Effect size.
That-
Effect size. That's good. We
that's
want
totally
that to be
research.
big. But wait, inconclusive results? That doesn't sound good. Well, okay, but it's the same thing that you were just talking to that guy about, right?
That's
All
right.
So we should probably just go with it.
Yeah. How will we know if it's going to work with our students? Is there anything about,
No.
well, the company's
know where it
website has a
was.
picture of students who look like ours.
They're learning and
They're
Right.
diverse.
Yep.
All right. Well, I got other things to do.
Right.
So,
I mean, I need to go teach a class, and
yeah.
I
All
don't
right.
have
We'll
time
go
to
with
go to
that.
the bathroom. Okay. All right. All right.
Let's go.
1 month later.
Okay. Superintendent Roberts, we think we have a tool.
Okay, great. That's fantastic. Is it working? Do your students like it?
No. We think we have one to try.
Oh, you do? Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. Well,
Yeah.
why don't you go ahead and put together a purchase order? I've got a couple of funds left before the end of the budget cycle. We might even be able to get a free trial in here. Let's go ahead and do that, see how your students like it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay, great,
All right.
thanks.
Okay. We'll just figure it out. All right. Okay. Cool. So, great.
2 months later.
Okay, how'd the pilot go? Were your students engaged?
Well, I mean, they like it better than the last thing they were using. They're not angry about using it.
Yeah. I mean, it's better than paper and pencil.
Marginally. Yeah.
So-
Fantastic,
Yeah,
great,
yeah.
great. Well, let's go ahead and put a purchase order together. And, it's got to, for the funding that we're using for this, it's got to be research-based. So this is a research-based product, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The white paper on the website.
There's a
Yeah.
website on
Yeah.
their
Great.
paper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah,
Thanks, guys.
sure.
That's
Okay.
that's incredible. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Cool.
A year later, in another school similar to the first one.
We're now different people in a different school.
Costume change.
Hello. So good to see you.
Yeah. How are you today? Sounds like we're Irish. Go ahead.
So we have a need in our classrooms. Our English language learners are really struggling with math. So if you have a process to figure out what tools could be potentially valuable, we could really use that support.
appreciate
Yeah,
it because
of
we're
course,
really,
of course.
really
Well, why don't you do a little
swamped. Thank
research
you.
on that,
No?
and then as soon as you find out, why don't you get back to me and we'll decide from there. Great. Y'all are doing a great job. Keep it up. Fantastic.
Okay.
And the process repeats. So thank you, Craig, Christina, and Bart. It's now my pleasure to introduce George Kane from the Emerson Collective, Betsy Corcoran, CEO of EdSurge, Chad Ratcliffe, who's the Innovation Officer at Albemarle County, Matt Greenfield from Rethink Education, and Brad Lane from Atlas Capital Partners. Again, all of the folks who are both part of the skit and are on stage were part of the symposium, so we're part of some of the working groups for the last year. And so what we're now going to do is kind of like take some of those things that we looked at in the skit or the scenarios and actually kind of talk through how the work that we did in the symposium and those working groups actually kind of connects to that work. So several of you were on the crowdsourcing, were on the educator voice working groups. How close did this scenario reflect what you have found?
Well, I'll start off. I think it reflects very closely what we see happening in the field. We have been collecting and compiling a sort of catalog of ed tech products for more than 5 years. And we have also, through a process we call Concierge, worked with more than 150 school leaders across the country. And these kinds of questions, they did a fantastic job of portraying both the complexity, the sort of cycleness of the process, the fact that educators are trying to be focused on solving a problem, but that too many times what happens is we accelerate into we need to get that purchase done. And so it feels pretty familiar to me. What about you guys?
I think turning to your peers is sort of an age-old habit and the right thing and the easy thing. But what you don't know in that situation is if it did work, under what situation, under what circumstances, and for what students. And so the kind of framing the questions of actually how to get advice that's useful from the people that you turn to was kind of highlighted there. We don't really know who those students are, how those teachers used it. That rung true for me.
Matt?
It's understandable. Oh, is it not? Yeah, it's understandable that people would be immensely distrustful of white papers, even peer-reviewed studies. There's an awful lot of trashy peer-reviewed stuff out there, and even the pharmaceutical industry cannot get its act together to figure out what works for which populations. It was only very recently that they started to look at the differing effects of drugs on female and male patients, which seems like a pretty big oversight when you think about it. The people whom one knows and trusts are quite likely to have students who resemble one's own. It's completely reasonable for them to behave in this way and to ignore, crowdsourcing. The other problem with crowdsourcing of opinions and ratings that two problems. One is that people don't want to say mean things in public, right? And
Especially educators.
Yeah, especially educators. If they have adopted something, they have a friendship with some of the people at the company, and they don't want to say that it doesn't work in public. They'll say it in private to their peers. And the other is just that the data tends to be rather thin. There has not been a good mechanism for getting people to participate in any of the crowdsourcing platforms that people have tried to create.
Chad, you are in a school district, and so you do this kind of process regularly.
I do, and I would add to that question as well, or observation, that we see this all too often with our peers across the country. And very quickly, I'd love to introduce Vince Shivert's in the office, in the audience. Vince is our Chief Information Officer, and we're asked to talk about this in various contexts. And one thing that one phenomenon that gets missed, but I think you heard Bart say, his contract's up in 3 years, and there's this interesting dynamic now with superintendents, and someone check me on this, but I think the average tenure of a superintendent is about 5 years, and maybe even 3 to 4 for big urban. So there's this real urgency to innovate, and it's become far too easy to buy the innovation device and then go to the buffet of innovations at the conference and load it up with innovations, and suddenly you're an innovative district. And that is something that we try very hard not to do. Anytime we implement any new technology, whether it be for infrastructure, whether it's instructional or otherwise, we're trying. The first question is, what problem are we trying to solve with this? It may emerge from the classroom. It may emerge from a parent community. Oftentimes it emerges from children. And so we put everything through some process, largely dependent upon its intended use and even the footprint of the rollout. Is that kind of what you're looking for, or would you like me to elaborate more on?
When do you, so it sounds like you have process in place, and you guys have been more the kind of front runners for this work. When do you deviate? Like, what kinds of circumstances make it such that you're like, okay, we're gonna skip this piece of a process, or we're not gonna pilot in a small group of schools first? Are there times when it makes more sense, or it's just like something that needs to happen, that you do it a little bit differently?
Maybe if when we're considering something large-scale division-wide, like a student information system or something like that, but the process always, we're a very transparent district. We engage multiple committees, and gain multiple perspectives anytime we implement. So that at the end of any process, even if it's a small process for a certain population of students or a division-wide process, the end decision will come as no surprise to the end user. And we think that allows us to do a couple things. It allows us to pivot off of something if we learn that maybe the product or even program might not be worthwhile. The other thing that makes us a little bit unique in that being in Central Virginia in a college town, we surround Charlottesville, our demographics run the gamut. We have very rural poverty schools in rural urban, or poverty. We have urban ring schools, some of which more than 70 languages are spoken. We also have highly affluent. So it's very difficult for us to choose one particular thing to give to all 14,000 students across the division.
And that's a great thing. I mean, that's the way it's supposed to be, right? Because not only do you have different students, and then, of course, across different schools, didn't quite come up in the skip, but the schools have different capabilities. They have different levels of infrastructure. They also are willing, Superintendent Roberts may or may not have been willing to provide a great deal of professional development support for his teachers. Or there might have been a community there that was either well-versed in starting to use new technologies and so forth. And then the last point, which I think Chad was referring to, is that not all technologies are the same. There are some things that should be implemented at a district level. There are some things that teachers should be allowed to experiment with because it's a small element of what they're doing. So there's so much diversity, and to try to simply turn to your friend and say, did it work for you, is a little bit like saying, your shoes look pretty nice, should I use those too?
And the same size. Exactly. Yeah.
I think one of the things that we saw at the symposium last week that was reflected here as well was there's not one place where you could find those kind of the broader substitute for the Ask a Friend, plus sort of vetted reviews, plus the actual research all in one place. And so just kind of Googling and poking around, you might find some pieces of that. But that was sort of one of the takeaways from getting these couple hundred people together last week was, wouldn't it be great if somebody would put that together so that when you get teachers and administrators looking at products, looking at piloting, the best practices, the sort of expert recommendations, the teacher case studies, and the research are all in one place. Hopefully from that, better decisions would come that were based on evidence and efficacy rather than just who you happen to raise on the phone.
And of course, we've been trying, right? I mean, Common Sense has done a great job. I think we've done a reasonable job. There are a couple of other things out there. But the other fundamental question is, how do you continue to have that information? How do you continue to have it updated in a regular way? How do you continue to support it? Because it does take a certain amount of work to curate that information and to do it regularly and well and sustainably.
So this is a classic market failure, and I find it bizarre. How many of you work for foundations? Any of you? Not very many. Okay. There are billions of dollars going from foundations into EdTech innovation in one way or another. Why doesn't someone just give Betsy another $15 million
I'll take it.
of non-dilutive financing? And I'm not a stakeholder personally, but this is something, it's a key leverage point, and it's not getting funded, right? It's absurd to put pressure on a startup to produce randomized controlled trials and publish them in peer-reviewed journals when Pearson is still not delivering on its efficacy promise on products of which it sells $500 million a year.
But it actually leads into the next question I was going to ask, which is whose responsibility is it, to be able to start bringing in more evidence into these conversations?
All of ours.
There you go.
I wasn't part of this working group, and so I'll speak to the investor part second, but this skit was it was an unfortunate parody that is playing across like all of our states, and for that to be the default is not really acceptable. While there is a lack of evidence in many cases, a lack of research, or in some cases research, but maybe not the most quality research, for people to default to qualitative decisions is not the right choice. We just, I mean, for the alternate is lengthy, it's expensive, but so is the former. What you just saw is lengthy, expensive, and you also don't know if it works. So, you know, if you're not thinking about these and making some decisions, not all, there's a place for academia and research, and there's a place for education administration. They're not the same, but if educators and people in procurement are not at least thinking about these decisions, then they're not doing their job correctly.
So most other industries will spend a couple percentage of the overall global revenue of the industry on business intelligence, which means they go out and they buy reports, or they do other things other than lean on a hardworking teacher and say, hey, please do this. Education has an unfortunate habit of not valuing the educator's time, and therefore assuming it is a free resource. And the result is tremendous amount of teacher burnout, tremendous amount of exactly what we saw in the skit, of people, what was the word you used, Bart? I've been voluntold. Voluntold. That is a great phrase. Voluntold has been a characteristic of how we've run our schools, you know, forever. And it's deeply unfortunate because, again, in any other line of work, people are spending money on business intelligence in order to make better choices.
Yeah, I would add to Betsy's comment too, that one thing that's missing with regard to educational technology, aside from very specific, you know, software solutions, often what works is relative. Because if you assume technology is neutral, you know, a laptop can be used in a million different ways, and what you put on that laptop is some sort of a representation or a reflection of your divisions, or divisions of Virginia district's philosophy. So one thing that's missing in research would be implementation factors. How do we start to document how are these things contextualized, so that if Vince or me or a teacher or someone else we're looking for a specific solution to something, but we can also go to the consumer reports and understand how schools or districts implemented under what conditions and in what context, and what their intent was to implement such technology.
But the pharmaceutical industry is putting billions of dollars into research and still not achieving that kind of specificity very often. So it may be unrealistic. As I was thinking about this comprehensive platform that you were describing, that contains data and case studies and randomized controls trials all in one place, it occurred to me that you also want to see a list of who has used it, so you can see who in your acquaintance network has experience with it. And also, maybe this is the business opportunity part of it, a professional development marketplace of some kind. So these are people who can help you be successful with one-to-one computing in general, or with this specific tool in particular.
And let's be clear, it shouldn't be that there's ever going to be a perfect website that's going to say, snap, that's the one thing that you should have, right? It's about reducing that first level of complexity that we saw in the skit, that sort of cycling around of like, oh, well, maybe we should investigate this, maybe we should Google this. How do you come up with a short list? How do you quickly come up with a short list of things that are valuable for your school to really investigate, as opposed to, you know, sort of cycling through same old, same old?
I think also having some processes defined ahead of time and some best practices, so that when products come up for consideration, which is going to happen all the time, there's a way we do it. There's steps in the process. There's a approval process, there's a comparison process, however it is, and that's something that new products can enter into, and it's not a one-off every time. So I'm actually curious sort of how you guys handle incoming product evaluations or needs evaluations that then result in product decisions.
Once again, it depends on the level and the intent of what those technologies are. You know, one thing that Vince is working on, as we're talking about educational technology, is to build. He's building out an LTE network across the entire division, not just for our kids in schools, but that's blowing out so they can access their devices and things and anywhere, anytime. And I bring that up because there's so many variables that go into any one single decision to implement that they all need to be evaluated, and the scale to which the implementation of any educational technology will depend on those particular variables. So we're, as I mentioned, we're a very transparent district, and we run everything through a ringer. And oftentimes, sometimes we may be seeking assistive technology for, a specific IEP or something like that, and through the process of evaluation, we may have learned, wow, this is something that we would want to push out on the image of all our schools. We believe very deeply in UDL and accessibility and equity with our devices. So, oftentimes these things, we stumble upon things. Other times we have a very deliberate, we need a new, SIS, or we need a new division-wide system to do X. So I had to say it just depends.
But here's the other trick. You guys have a lot of stuff to do. You probably are a really busy guy. Documenting everything that you're doing and then sharing it out with the world is also complex. So to what degree can you spend time doing that, and what would either help or, help facilitate that?
Well, as much as we love to share our work with other districts, I don't have time to write 20-page analysis on everything we buy. I know Vince surely does not. Support documenting those types of decisions would certainly be beneficial if that's an intent of this issue. But yeah, we're a very lean central office by design. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time writing this up. We have our internal documentation, but I don't, that's different than something public-facing for other divisions to make multi-million-dollar decisions on.
And one of the suggestions from a couple groups actually was this idea of some kind of fellows that would either taking folks who are already in the district and giving them some training and a little extra money in the summer to be able to write those up, or actually sending in fellows who's their whole job, especially in larger districts, to kind of document that process so we can all learn from that. So that was one of the suggestions that came through. I'm going to switch gears for a second, because several of you invest in ed tech providers. So what role does research and evidence play in how you have historically made investment decisions, and if any of that is changing?
So we have a couple of efficacy assessment hacks. And the first one is just to ask, why do you think this is going to work? And when, for example, someone starts talking about learning styles, you know that in fact they have not built the product based on the best academic evidence, that they are in fact unfamiliar with learning science in general. And if they don't know what the universal design for learning is, that would be another tip-off. So people can also refer to personal experience when they explain why they think something is going to work, but it's the quality of evidence. And there is a lot of learning research out there. There was a fascinating study, meta-study, published by the Department of Education back in 2010, that found that, among other things, there was a pretty dramatic effect size for just asking people what they had just learned and how they had learned it. Now that is a very simple feature to put into almost any kind of product, so it's sort of baffling that we don't see it a little bit more often. So the second hack is just looking at engagement, right? So you have a pilot, you have 2 districts using your product, or 6 districts. Show us the data on engagement of the users. How many times a week do they use it? How many minutes each time they use it? Is there a drop-off after the second week? Do they never get going with it? Or conversely, is this something that, like our company Flocabulary, when we first invested, they were getting 40% of their revenue from teachers. That is a business model that we hate, and our goal was to transform that into district revenue. But it was a tip-off that teachers found the product extremely valuable.
I guess my answer would be previously, we haven't. So I take personal blame, and I would say most of my colleagues fall into a similar category where they've been evaluating things not too dissimilar from the skits that were playing earlier in education and procurement. It's similar in the investor community. It's based on cachet, it's based on innovation, who else is in the deal, who's the CEO, what is their distribution currently, how many schools are they in, later stages, revenue, profitability, et cetera. Some of them focus on student outcomes, but it's certainly not the first or second, and almost none of the investment in let's say 90% of the capital deployed over the past 5 years, which is in excess of $5 billion, has been focused on the type of real academic science-based efficacy. And so I think that is a call to action for all of us. From a moral perspective, we are here hopefully first and foremost to change the lives of students and humans. If that doesn't hold up, then from a financial perspective, if you are investing in companies that are not based on real quantitative data, then it's more or less a fingers crossed. I hope this works, and that usually doesn't play out so well. And so those companies, as any business, not just education, if the underlying assets aren't producing efficacious results, the company will not be sustainable. And so as investors, we should all wake up. That means that our money will also die along with that company when it fails. It's just going to take a long time, and we're going to put a lot of money into it. And so all of this is, again, timely, expensive, takes a long time, but there should be some focus and a general responsibility on all of us, including investors, on the supply side for the innovation that we're putting out there to be based on a more rigorous framework.
In general, we're looking at, through the lens of how is the product or service going to impact the child, the student. So that's really at the center of things. Some products obviously are more back office oriented, but ultimately, what's sort of the logic chain out to impacting the lives of students, especially those from underprivileged backgrounds who for whom the product has to have sort of a special design principle, ideally. At the same time, how impact is measured is critical, and at different stages of a company's life cycle, those might be different measurements. So it might be more anecdotal earlier on, and then as you actually have usage, it can become more quantitative and rigorous. So trying to sort of impose a gold standard too early can actually get in the way of finding out what the true value is. But I think keeping on coming back to that core issue of how does use of the product, effective use of the product, actually lead to learning gains as one measure is critical. At the same time, it's about impact at scale. And so, you can have a product that gets great impact, but with an unsustainable amount of support or professional development, and ultimately that's going to crumble under its own weight. So is there a way to make sure that you're innovating on the delivery and the underlying systems to make sure that this can be used broadly and the company can become sustainable and have that impact that you're seeking?
And we've heard a couple times this idea of, I think Brad, you used the word like a moral imperative, or the idea of like, this is what is best for kids, this is what is the right thing to do. But the ecosystem right now is not really structured to actually, so I mean, we also have a lot of people investing in ed tech who may not be as interested in the double bottom line as they are really, like, they're investing in a company and they want to look for returns. What are some of the things that we can do that might actually shift some of that? Like, as investors, what kinds of things could, if we shifted in the market, would actually make it easier to be able to make that argument, for instance, to investors or investing in your fund that you're then going out into doing into companies? What do we need to do to actually change to be able to make that more part of the process, rather than just like, it's the right thing to do?
There are a number of platforms and tools for measuring efficacy that are starting to hit scale. So eSpark, for example, allows you to conduct A/B tests of not only different apps, but different videos or texts or exercises. My company, Bright Bytes, has partnered with a foundation to build a version of their technology and learning module that correlates the data from EdTech vendors whom the foundation has backed at a very granular level, individual classrooms, individual students, with student outcomes. And they have a footprint of almost 9 million students. We have a company in the higher ed area, Civitas, that is doing the same thing there. So it's going to be harder and harder to get away with products that are inefficacious or simply not used. Those things will be measured increasingly.
Is the time scale for when you want investments to pay off the same in education technology as it is in commercial software? And should it be?
Well, everyone is looking, in venture capital is looking for the Instagram, 2 years, $1 billion exit. That doesn't happen all that often outside of education either.
Yeah.
People think of K-12 in particular as a bad area for investment. And in fact, even a lot of the ed tech funds now say they are not going to invest in companies that sell to K-12 school districts. But the numbers don't really bear them out, right? It is a market that is limited in size if you're just selling in the US and you're just selling to K-12, right? You've got 55 million students. If you're selling at $5 per student, you can do the math. That's not huge. But at the same time, there are a lot of ed tech companies that sell to K-12 school districts that have very attractive software as a service metrics that actually have profit, that don't take vast amounts of money to scale. And a lot of people don't understand that. Right, so Workday has over $2 billion in revenue. You're not going to see a lot of those companies in education, but at the same time, they had to blow through, $1.5 billion to get there? It was expensive, and it's possible to build a relatively economically efficient company in this sector. It's just very hard to persuade most venture capitalists of that. And then there's this question of scale. If you have a $600 million fund, and someone shows you something that is likely to have a $150 million exit, you cannot invest in it, right? It doesn't, the phrase is, it doesn't move the needle, right? You need to own 20% of $3 billion acquisitions to even return your fund once over. So you cannot focus on smaller things. So that is a wonderful opportunity for investors whose funds are sized appropriately.
I would add that the notion of a double bottom line, it's maybe false. There's one bottom line. If we are not investing in things or procuring things that are driving outcomes in students, then we will fail.
It can take a very long time. If you look at a bad for-profit college, say, some of them are able to thrive for quite a long time alongside of the good ones, sometimes past the time horizon of an investor. Yeah, we look at things that raise moral questions frequently. one company that had very attractive financial metrics. We figured out that the primary use case for the product was cheating. And that bothered us. It didn't seem to bother other investors who stampeded to get into that particular company. Now, it could still be a zero. It's serving the worst tendencies of American education right now, and there are IP issues with publishers, and it could be a big mess. I think that basically the way I would say it is you're not guaranteed to lose your money if you invest in something that is not respectful of all stakeholders, but you're writing a put on your investment and on your reputation.
And to Betsy's point, I think that's important to note that most investors in this space are not philanthropy. They are working with a time frame based on LPs that is generally either 7 years or 10 years, and they need to produce returns before then. And that is, that's driving bad decisions, and it's not a place for something that is fundamentally human to thrive in. And so I think that is, one call to action. I'm in a unique perspective. I run a family office that's an evergreen fund, so we have a longer term horizon. And if you look at any asset class, real estate, education, healthcare, decisions made based on that generally succeed with many standard deviations more. And so the alternative is not rigging the system. It's not financial arbitrage. What we need to do is come to terms with that, and then as far as what solutions do I have, I think Bart has better solutions than I, and that was the purpose of this working group. I don't have the solutions, but as an investor, I'd be willing to allocate twice as much capital to an investment that I had more surety that was going to work out than just investing in more companies and hoping that 1 out of the 10 was the next Instagram for education. And I think there are a lot of others that be possibly willing to match that, whether they be foundations or otherwise.
So thank you. So before we close, we're going to return to that faculty room, and this time they have better tools.
You guys, I found an awesome website. I think I found how we can find our next EdTech product. All right, so it combines all this information from existing resources like EdSurge and Common Sense Media and Learn and the RCE Coach by Mathematica. And we even have information here about the implementation context and the district context from the EdTech pilot framework. So it's all in one place.
You know what I really like is, what I want to know is, what do our peers go through? That messy process of poking around and trying things and making mistakes and implementing it. And it looks like there are in-depth reports in there written by our peers that are supported by research fellows that were embedded in their schools.
Now, wait a minute. Do these reports include information about student data privacy, about platform compatibility? I'm tired of teachers and teacher groups coming to me with new technologies that they want us to use that don't work with our systems at all.
Yeah, it looks like the interoperability information and the privacy information is all here. It's all in one place.
I bet other districts could learn a lot from our experience with Raindrop. But I don't have time to write that up.
I saw at the bottom here, there's even an incentive program for educators to contribute their experience with different EdTech tools. I think it's worth our time to add our Raindrop story to the mix here.
I think so too.
Okay, thank you. A big thank you to all of our role players and our esteemed panelists for their willingness to participate in the session this morning. I invite any of the audience who have additional questions about the symposium and the information that was uncovered. Don't hesitate to reach out to any one of those on stage over the next couple of days over this conference. Thank you.